Hey, thanks, Hugh, and thanks for the introduction. I didn't expect the introduction, so it's even better. So welcome to this Sysadmins Ask the Managers panel. Here's the concept is, you all work for people, we all work for people, and through the course of our day, we're not treated well, or we are treated well. We don't know what's going on in our boss's mind. We wish we could ask, but they never have time, or they're just not somebody that's approachable. So here's an opportunity. We've gathered together a panel of experienced technical managers who manage technical staff. And this is your chance to ask them the questions that you wish you could ask, get an honest and sincere answer, or maybe find out that the BS answer you've always got is actually the real answer. It's kind of like being a kid staying at a friend's house. You can talk to some different parents, see how other folks do things.
So if they're pissed off at their boss, they're going to take it out on us?
Clearly, Scott, that is the whole point of this.
That was in the description.
It pretty much is, right? So that's the concept. I want to give a special call out to Hugh Brown, my friend who just introduced. This was actually an idea that Hugh and I had together, and we put together this idea, and then he stuck me with moderating it. So I just want to say thank you, Hugh. In the same way that all of our panelists thank me for suckering them into doing this. So our goal here is to give you insights, give you things that you can take back to your jobs, really as survival skills, ways to be more effective at your jobs by being able to navigate that political manager layer that gets sometimes in your way of doing the technical things that you're actually good at, that you're actually paid for. We've got 45 minutes. We're down to like 43 minutes now. What we're going to do is I'll introduce the panel, let them introduce themselves a little bit. We'll start into some questions. I've got some questions I'll ask. Along the way, think about the question that you want to ask. What do you think about? Have you ever done? My boss said this. Do you know why? Where am I going in my job? Whatever it is that your career-based, supervisory, I wish I could talk to question is, get ready for it. I'll walk around. I'll be daytime TV host, and we'll ask it. So who we have on the panel here, we have starting with Carolyn Rowland. You may recognize her as being the president of USENIX, certified big shot, also a manager of ops and dev folks at NIST in the engineering lab. We've got Cory Lueninghoener. First time I've ever actually said his name correctly because it has more vowels than it needs, who is the manager of HPC system integrators, researchers, developers, and students. So he's got a lot of diversity in his camp. Mike Rembetsy is the manager of systems engineering and administration. Scott Cromar is an experienced manager, but also the author of From Techie to Boss. And then finally, last on our panel here is Connie-Lynne Villani, who is a SRE manager and incident response manager. So with that, let me give you a chance to introduce yourselves with a little more detail and what you're getting out of this and why you're here. Carolyn?
I'm here because you asked me to be here.
Done.
I am also here because you asked me to be here.
Oh man, this is not going well for me at all.
What do you want to know?
Well,
That's what this is about.
So what's the size of your staff? What's the scope of your work? And et cetera.
I have a dev team and an ops team. It's all one team, but they kind of do different things. We work mostly on open data in a research environment, so we have a lot of crazy shit like fire and robots and stuff.
She said crazy shit.
Sorry. And so researchers come to us and say, help me, I need to do something. And we say, well, what do you need? And then we put the right team on it so that we can help them automate or write device drivers or release data, whatever the need is for that particular project. It's pretty fun. I have a pretty diverse staff and of juniors to advanced people, women, minorities, so there's a lot of cool stuff going on, and I love my team.
So I'm Cory, as Andy introduced me correctly. I am at Los Alamos National Laboratory, and I have a couple of teams under me, some of which do computer science research, and some of which run high-performance computing systems, and we get a bunch of students all the time, and so a lot of different things going on. For a little bit of history, I involuntarily became a manager in about 2012 when I was asked to take over the team that I had been on previously, and since then I have continued doing things. I like the technical side, but I also like being able to influence hiring and look at the budgets and figure out how to actually make them work better for the people on the team, those sorts of things. So that's kind of what has encouraged me to keep doing this sort of thing, even after I've been doing it for 4 or 5 or whatever years now.
So I'm Mike Rembetsy. I work at Bloomberg, and I am on here because Carolyn asked me to be here. See what I did there? Anyhow. So I have multiple teams, mostly focusing around operating systems at Bloomberg, a wide variety of different flavors, as well as administration, engineering. I'm also responsible for the performance of those systems, as well as the infrastructure platform tools that we build and let other teams leverage. I'm mostly hoping to get good questions from people in the audience about what they're thinking of what their managers are thinking, right? I've had a variety of different types of teams throughout my career. My background has been spent previous to Bloomberg, 7.5 years as the VP of Tech Ops at Etsy.com. And before that, I was in consulting for a very long time, running McDonald's online promotion the first 4 years that it was out. I worked for NBC Universal after they bought iVillage. And so I've had quite a scale of different types of individuals, as well as contributors on an engineering side and not. And I personally think my manager code, i.e. spreadsheets, are way better than my other codes, so that's why I'm also in management.
My name's Scott Cromar. I'm the manager for the Unix and Linux administrators for Convergys Corporation. Because I guess if we want to talk about cutting edge management, we should definitely talk to a manager at a former AT&T spinoff. My boss is going to be able to see this recording, isn't he? Mm-hmm. Oops. I just hope to hear from people, see if I can give you some answers.
My name's Connie-Lynne Villani, and I currently am not working. But when I was working, the last time I managed, I built Groupon's SRE, Groupon's Site Reliability Engineering team. We started with about me and no other engineers, and we grew it to between 30 and 50 people, depending on how you split out site reliability engineering versus production operations. And I am a manager. I go through cycles where sometimes I'm an individual contributor and sometimes I'm a manager. I like them both, but the thing I love most about managing is the same thing that I love most about being an engineer, which is finding interesting problems and solving them, which is why I focus on incident prevention and response. But I just love to solve problems, and it turns out that I'm pretty good at helping solve the people problems too, and helping, I'm gonna say a manager word, helping people achieve their highest potential and fulfillment. But it sounds like BS, but it really is super fun when it goes right.
Did it sound like BS? So as an employee, when your manager says, I'm here to help you fulfill your potential, does it make you laugh? Does it make you cringe? Sometimes, right? Do you believe it? Sometimes you believe it. Okay, that's a better answer than I expected. Who thinks it's total okay? Some of us do sometimes, right? That's a very good insight on the BS level. Yeah. Managers, I've always felt as a manager of small and large teams that the manager sets tone. If I'm happy, it gives a chance for my employees to be happy, but if I'm having a bad day, then my employees tiptoe around my mood. Managers set tone, which is not directly related to the technical team's activities. That's an interesting insight.
So, Andy, speaking of tone and the wording and everything, one of the things I have hated about becoming a manager is needing to start using that language, because as much as I try not to, it turns out that I have to say things. I have to refer to people as resources sometimes, or I have to say I'm going to help them fulfill their potential or whatever.
But why? Why do you have to do that?
It's the words that describe the concept the best, honestly. That's when I fall back on management speak, is when I need to express a concept, and jargon is useful in certain respects. But I like to call myself out on it when I use it, because, I know I'm sounding like a manager when I say things.
I'm going to pat you on the head and tell you what you want to hear.
Well, wait a minute. We need jargon. We have jargon in tech.
Yeah.
Managers also have jargon, and sometimes we're the bridge between some senior manager who doesn't know what the tech is and needs to understand, well, are these people successful? Why do we have so many of them? Why do we need more of them? Why do we need to pay them more? And so if we can't talk in their language to explain why our people are successful, they won't understand and they won't provide the resources we need.
So you're describing the middle manager's role as having to satisfy, feed the mouth above and feed the mouth below. But they're different, they're different needs. And every head on the team costs an amount of money that has to be justified, and we don't care what their names are.
No. Absolutely not. For me, the point that I'm getting, or at least that I'm hearing and that I try and practice, is that people are individuals. They have to be treated as individuals. You have to be able to have real conversation with them. If jargon comes in, guess what? That comes with the territory of being a manager, right? Because we also have pressures around HR requirements, or you can't tell someone they're a piece of whatever blank you want to fill in, right? I'm not going to say shit like Carolyn. Oh, wait, I just did. Anyhow.
You just said shit again.
Losing
control. We're
exactly.
losing control.
But at the same time, you do actually have to turn around and provide solid, concrete feedback for people, which I think is important. You have to be able to say to them, hey, look, your language has been extremely abrasive, or it hasn't been interpreted by other people. The perception of you is not jargon. It's actually real talk. That people have to, on the other end of this as an IC, because I've been an IC too, be able to be willing from
That's
an ego
jargon for individual contributor.
There you go. They have to be willing, or at least
which is jargon for a normal person
who does work, right? They have to be willing to sort of not necessarily put their ego at the door and check it at the door, but they have to be willing to listen to feedback if it is a feedback-driven sort of conversation, and be like, oh, you know what? Let me think about this for 1 second in the shoes of my manager or the shoes of another peer of mine, and maybe they do have a point, right? And just see it from their side for 35 seconds to try and understand, right? But the jargon up, I think, is a very interesting point that we brought up here, is that I'm lucky enough that my manager is very technical, and the manager above him is very technical. So I can actually have very deep technical conversations about technologies, about the resources that we have, because people do equate to resources and they do equate to people. They're both, right? They're not one or the other, and they have to be treated accordingly with mindful communication, positive feedback loops, things like that. But I do communicate upward very technical to people as well as to my ICs and have those deep technical conversations. I think the biggest thing for me is the strategy of where we're going and the vision of where we're going and what we are implementing has to be driven from the bottom up and the top down. It's not just a command and control sort of management style that people have anymore. About 8 years ago or so, I saw that kind of flip, right? It used to be like, you, go reboot that server. All right? Now it's kind of like, wait, why am I rebooting it? There's this cool new technology that we can orchestrate this with, and we can do this. It's like, oh, well, tell me more about it, right? So I also think now the role of a manager, in addition to having jargon, is also we have to check our own egos at the door too. We have to be willing to be like, we don't have all the answers, but we are willing to listen to others who have ideas, respect those ideas, explore those ideas, and invalidate them if need be, but also listen.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, and I'm very much into a collaborative style of management, and I find that people are happiest in their jobs. Most people wouldn't come to work if they didn't have to get something out of it, right? But people are happiest in their jobs when they get a sense of ownership and agency. Agency is a sense of agency, which means that you get to make your own choices and you get to do what you want to do in life. And so instead of, like you said, me saying, all right, you have to go reboot that server or you have to go and do this, they're allowed to, within the constraints of, hey, we've got these various tasks that we need to accomplish, they get to pick which of those tasks and also how they go about accomplishing those tasks. And I will say that I've always learned as much from my team as I think I'm giving to my team, and maybe more sometimes, when I make it a collaborative environment, when I set things up for that, because then it turns out that I do not in fact have all the answers or know all the things. And my team comes up with all sorts of wonderful solutions that I would never have guessed or never had time for when I don't even have the opportunity to think about that because I'm busy thinking about, this is the end state that we need to be in, and this is how I talk to other managers and other teams and other people within the company. My team is busy taking care of the job of getting done what they need to get done. And I love that collaborative style, and I love working with people who are confident, or if they're not confident when they come into my team, I like to try to instill that confidence and that sense of agency within them.
We have a question from the audience.
Oh, you poor people. It sounds like most of you are not managing managers, you're managing a team. What happens when you have, and I don't want to go into all these situations, but what happens when you have a manager that you go to them, you ask them questions, and it just goes into a black hole? So you get to the point you go around that manager to somebody else, and then something gets done, but nobody sees that. I mean, do you guys find sometimes obviously you might have ICs that are doing that, but what happens when you have to manage the manager and they're not good? You guys are all good, obviously.
I think you always have to manage your manager, whether they're good or not. I don't know. I think one of the toughest things for technical people when they become managers is to kind of let go of the technical piece and recognize that is no longer your job, that your job is now different. And so the sort of behavior that you're describing is one that I've seen quite a few times in especially relatively new managers who haven't made that shift, where they're no longer the quality contributor. Now they're expected to enable the quality contributors. I know I had a conversation with one of my guys last week where I said, my job is to hold the umbrella so the rain doesn't fall on your head while you're doing the actual work. I don't see that he needed to know that.
So, Scott, you say you just said something very interesting about the difference. So you're not the contributor; you're now orchestrating the contributor. Describe what happened the first time you made that transition. Now, I'm assuming that you had a role where you were an individual contributor at one point in your life. Then you had a role where you were a manager, and there was some time in between where you were one, you became the other. How did that happen for you? What happened?
So my particular background is kind of different. I trained as a mathematical physicist. So this is obviously what I trained for. But along the way, I taught junior high school science, which tremendously rewarding, and I really love teaching. And so in terms of my making that transition, that was the path that I followed, that I went from being sort of the quality contributor person to thinking of myself as a mentor to help other more junior people become quality contributors. And part of that is honestly just letting go and letting somebody else do some of those engineering, design, and implementation tasks that I enjoyed.
So let me follow on but shift. Cory, same question, but let me ask you the same setup, different question. What training did you have to be successful?
Not as much as I would have liked, maybe. I went into being a manager kind of by surprise. I was asked to fill in a role that was open or that was going to become open.
Congratulations.
That, yes. And so I didn't have formal training before that, so I hadn't taken classes about how to talk to people and those sorts of things. So I kind of dove into it, but I certainly had experience on teams running smaller projects and mentoring students and those sorts of things that I could immediately tap into to think about what I'd done in the past that fit into this larger team. Going back to what you're originally asking, though, I noticed that one of the most surprising things about becoming a manager was how quickly my level of influence went up. That not long after it, we were talking in a meeting about a project, and I said, it'd be interesting if we tried this particular thing. And like 2 days later, somebody said, okay, I did that. I thought, whoa, wait a minute. I meant it would be interesting to think about that, not that this was our direction that we had to do it this way. So, just saying little off-the-cuff sort of things isn't something I could do anymore. I needed to think more about what I was doing.
As a manager, each word has more gravity because people are looking for guidance, and what you say might be interpreted as guidance.
Yeah.
And that's maybe where your words start diluting down to jargony talk.
And I think for this audience, that's really important, that if your manager is saying something and it might be brainstorming and not a direct do this, you might want to clarify so you're not going off and doing something that maybe wasn't a priority or you didn't need to do, so you don't do work that is unnecessary.
And,
Don't just assume.
And maybe just as a brainstorming with the panel and with the room here, the way you just teed that up and described that can result in a manager who seems overly task-driven. Do this, I'm going to measure you on how you did it, because otherwise everything's just crazy.
It could also, it could also imply not having a vision or a direction for the team and too much shifting of priorities, which is also equally frustrating for a team that could be context switched all over the place. And that is something that I'm very careful about too. You've got to watch that as a manager for sure. And the ICs should feel comfortable enough to be like, wait, last week you wanted us to do this, now you want us to do that. Which one is it?
But it's also very individual. So some people will understand your way of communicating and be like, oh, well, she's just talking about stuff that might be interesting, whereas one specific employee might be like, oh my God, she just said to do that. I have to go do that right now. And then that person has additional stress because they feel like everything you say, they have to go do. So somebody said it earlier at the very beginning that each person's an individual, so you have to manage them as individuals. You can't be like, well, everybody does this, and I'm going to treat them all the same. You want to treat them all fairly, but you need to manage them as individuals because they're all different. They're unique people.
And I think that what you said also ties back to your question about, when people start going around the managers or managing up. Wherein I've worked where I had to tell my vice president came up with a list of like, here's all the 5 or 10 or here are the top 35 priorities for this quarter, right? And I just go and you have to say, okay, that's really great that those are all the things that you want done, but here's the reality of what the resourcing on that would look like, right? Here's the people and the equipment and everything else that we would need to do to get that done, and that's a really good example of how you have to manage up and how you have to make sure that people are not going around you as a manager and that you're actually dealing with that. And also when I've managed managers, to answer your question specifically about what would I do if my managers were going around, and there's any number of motivations why someone might go around their manager, and that's you look at the performance there the same way that you would look at that with an individual contributor, and you say, look, the reasons why I can't have you going around me are because it causes the job to be more difficult or more messy because of X, Y, and Z. So and then you think about that and you say, what I really need is X, Y, and Z not to happen. And
question
you look
from
at
the
all
audience?
So I'm on a team that recently split up into a bunch of smaller teams. Divorce went as well as it could. And one former teammate is now leading a team and is happy with it. He wanted to do that. Another team member is leading a team, and from what I can tell, he's not happy with it. It's something that he does because it needs to be done, but it's not his first love. My team just got a manager, so that's good. It's not my role, but I'm the most experienced person on the team. And as everyone gets up to speed on the project and what we're doing, I need to be at least somewhat vocal with what needs to happen. If we're going to do this, we have to do that, we have to set it up. I need to do that. I don't want to step on my manager's shoes. I also don't want to make it look like I'm gunning for his job in the sort of aggressive sense, or like, hey, I'd like a promotion, because I wouldn't. I want to stay technical. How do I balance all those things?
Well, to be honest, your manager probably is interested in your viewpoint and your input and your viewpoint. I don't know what the interactions are like in your staff meetings or whatever. But if there is an opportunity to present information there, then that's a great opportunity to do it. And you can phrase it as a question: what if we did this? A lot of times asking questions to provoke thoughts is a good way to do it. If there's not an opportunity like that, one-on-one conversations are great. Hey, I had this thought. Sometimes when I want to talk to my manager about direction, I will schedule an appointment. I'll say, when can I have 15 minutes of your time? There's something I need to talk to you about.
So there's a couple. You have a question? Okay. Cool.
I just walked by her and asked her if she had a question, and she said no.
All right, fine. I'll put it in the form of a question. Do you think this would be appropriate for your one-on-one with your boss?
Good question, Hugh.
This is Jeopardy. No, I'm just kidding.
The question is, or the response is, should that be a one-on-one with your boss, and why haven't you done it yet?
I think that would be an absolutely appropriate thing for my boss. I think my boss would be open to it. The boss is very, very new to the team, as in like a couple of weeks. So it's been a matter of finding the time to do that. But I know that we both want to have that conversation.
So I have a couple things that I want to just kind of talk in on here. Like, so if you don't, how many people here have regularly scheduled one-on-ones with their manager? Okay. How many times do you keep that? All the time? Raise your hand. Some of the time? Okay. That's really important. So you should have that regardless, because I do think that that is the appropriate time to bring things up in private, one-on-one. That is your time with your manager to bring up anything you want. That's my expectation as a manager. If you don't have that, you can have a conversation in your one-on-one that should be the expectation as advice that I could give. I think that we've been talking a little bit about motivation too in some ways. I've heard the word a couple times. I fully subscribe to the Daniel Pink sort of method of motivation. How many people have read Drive? Okay. So carrot and stick, everybody knows what that is, right? Head shaking, this is good, we have interaction. Okay. Just saying, we're all awake, that's good. Daniel Pink, I'll give you the TLDR so you don't have to read the book. Sorry, Daniel. But he approaches it from a scientific perspective, and there's three basic principles that he has, right? One is the purpose. Do you as an IC, do you as a manager, do you as an individual, period, feel as though you are, you have purpose in what you're doing? You're learning the things you want. You're investing time in what you want to do. Mastery is the second one. Are you mastering what you want? I want to go learn about this new technology. Am I being given the time? Is my manager listening to my ideas in my one-on-one? And finally, the autonomy. Connie mentioned this earlier. Do you have the autonomy to actually work within your organization, within your group, to contribute, again, in my mind, back to the higher level strategies and long-term proposal or long-term goals, whether it's Q1, Q2, Q3, that's going to move the needle forward on things? So we've been talking a little bit around that, but I just wanted to say those words. So,
You got another question, follow-up?
So what happened if your one-on-one interaction with your manager is once a year at your performance review?
Find a new job.
I'm pretty sure we're all hiring, so yeah, it's fine. You can come talk to me after, no problem.
Reach out and schedule one. Just, hey, when can I schedule 15 minutes? And put it on the calendar.
So managers, you've mentioned scheduling one-on-ones. How do you as managers juggle that? Because you've got 24 hours in a day and you sleep for 3 or 4 of them.
My calendar looks like a Tetris game sometimes. It's
I have
fine.
28 hours in a day.
Yeah.
Wait a minute, you defied physics and you just had a stressful sound come out of you.
Mathematical physics comes in real handy in terms of the
Okay,
time compression.
and then the actual physicist is like, I'm totally gaming that thing, right? So there's a little bit of a nerve there, I think. And I can say from my own experience that my life becomes not owned by me. What are your tools, tricks, tips? How do you handle that and how do you work through it?
So this is going to sound really, really mechanical and impersonal. I actually have a checklist of all the people on my team, and when I have a one-on-one phone call with them, I check their name off, and that lets me make sure that I've actually touched base with everyone. Because earlier in my managerial career, I discovered there were people I hadn't talked to for 2 weeks, and that wasn't such a good thing.
I think it's important. We're talking about having a meeting, but I'm thinking of people that I've worked for in the past, that if you have these recurring face-to-faces or on the phones or whatever with your manager, that it's you talking and not the manager. I mean, the manager can talk, but it's really about you communicating with your manager, not your manager spending however much time telling you things. You have to have the opportunity to talk.
We get emotionally fatigued as managers, I would propose.
Every day.
And so in the morning, I'm a brilliant manager. In the afternoon, I would just as soon bite your head off.
Is that afternoon London time? So like by 9 my time? Because I've got a London team, and by 9:30 I'm shot.
So there's a certain degree I would propose of personal emotional self-control and discipline that comes into this. Cory, you haven't spoken the most so far. What do you think about that?
Do you have like a timer or something that you can tell who's talked the most?
Yes.
Okay. What was the question? I was sleeping.
All right, so I noticed that you were yawning, so I wanted to wake you up. But also, so the question is, you have a large team. You described a large and diverse team. Now, in all honesty, I've done a terrible job. I apologize to the audience for this panel because they all seem like outstanding managers with good teams, which means that nobody's complaining. I really envision this whole thing as just one big cry fest, and it's really lovely. But you've got a diverse team, and I assume they consume of your emotional strength through the course of a day. My dog died. I can't finish my project because I have to go take care of my dog, or whatever. These things, and they add up over time. So what do you do, and how do you cope with that, and not turn into the 9 o'clock London time bite people's heads off?
A very big part of what I have is a management team around me. I'm not the only manager in the company or in the division that I am in. So I have the HPC division is split into 3 groups that each has 2 managers at the top level, a manager and a deputy, and then it gets to team leads after that. So the 6 of us, those 3, or the 2 top people in each of the 3 groups, get together very frequently as a support group of sorts to talk about what's going on in each of the groups, to help each other out, to offer ideas, to offer to help out with particular people, to know what's going on in each of the groups, so that when I just had a conversation with somebody that didn't go well, I can tell another person, I can tell one of the other managers, and the next time they see that person, they can say something to help out. So we all support each other as a very strong part of what we do.
Mutual support and trust.
Yeah.
That sounds like a great place to work. Can I talk to you later?
I think you have to have a little bit of self-awareness, because while you were talking about this, I was thinking about something that happened to me earlier this year. Over the course of a 3-week period, I had one of my team members come to me, tell me he had kidney cancer. I had another one come to me and tell me he had a degenerative disease and he'd been given 9 months to live. So, that, I mean, on a personal level, that's awful, and with both of them, I spent a lot of time, it's not like I got a counseling degree or anything, but counseling with these people who were dealing with major life crises. And then when I hung up with them, I had to think, oh shit, what just happened to my on-call schedule? How am I, both of these guys are doing important things that I've got tight timelines I'm being judged on. How am I going to fill those 2 slots at once? And there's no way in the world I can be calling them while they're out, because they're dealing with something a lot bigger than my timeline. But the little selfish bit of me back here is thinking, oh crap, I'm in trouble.
I want to make another point that we're talking about all these meetings like this is really stressful and horrible, but I enjoy those meetings more than the other meetings that I have. It's actually kind of a rest period for me. I don't have to be the one that's saying, okay, here, I'm going to tell you about these things. Let me go over the budget. Let me talk about this. I'm just listening. And I got into tech because I like problem solving. So people come to me and they're saying, okay, well, I have this challenge. It could be a technical challenge or a personal challenge. But it helps me understand how the inner workings of the team are functioning. Why is this person not as productive? Well, now I know, because they came to me and said, look, I'm having trouble balancing my childcare, or I have an illness, or I'm technically not able to do this because I don't have the right skills, or I need more time to get up to speed. I love that time. And even though it seems like a lot of time because each staff member has that opportunity to talk to me, it really is the time that I look forward to most of all the meetings that I have. It's not the stressful time, even though sometimes it's negative news. I don't want that, but I love that. I love that part of my job. And I think people are far more complex than computers, so it's an even bigger challenge than trying to solve tech.
It's absolutely the best part of the job is when you can help somebody get around, whatever personal stuff is going on with them. And I think too, like one of the ways that we do get emotionally fatigued sometimes as managers because of dealing with whatever we're dealing with, or maybe you're just having a bad day because of whatever. I have some physical challenges in my life and that makes things difficult for me. And be honest with your team. You don't have to, you shouldn't come in and be a mess every single day, but because, but like if you come in and you say, you know what, y'all, I'm going to have to reschedule the rest of the meetings for this afternoon, or I need to go and take myself for a little bit of a walk because I'm not being a good person right now, or however you want to phrase it. Like, it's nice when you know that your manager is also a human.
I think if you allow them to be human, they allow you to be human too.
Okay, we got a question from the audience.
How do you appropriately give feedback to your manager? So you get feedback on one-on-ones and annual reviews, but how do you give feedback to your manager on what they're doing right or wrong?
You mean review up?
Hopefully they ask you.
Yeah, does your manager ask you during a review? Does your manager ask an open-ended question like, do you have anything else for me?
No.
Wow, that's frightening. Schedule the 15-minute talk. But you'll have to think about how to phrase your concerns diplomatically, unless you actually have another position lined up. But I mean, all of us have to manage up. I mean, so you become a manager now I report to a director. So I have to manage my director. If someday I become a director, I'll have to manage my VP. You always have to manage up, and managers have different strengths and weaknesses.
Yes to all of that, and I think providing feedback is not just a manager's job, right? It's a skill that everyone should learn to have, regardless of what position, because you being able to have the confidence with language, so now we're kind of getting back into language, right? But also conveying a message to someone who, as Scott said, like, you better have another job lined up, but you want to get your point across and still kind of keep your job. That is a skill that you will learn over time, right? So what I have found to be helpful is if I know I'm going to have a difficult conversation with my manager, I prep that, just like probably your manager preps you if they're going to have a difficult conversation. Not saying you ever have, but maybe I just made an assumption. I apologize. But it's like, hey, so-and-so, this is going to be a difficult conversation for me. I want you to know that. And when we as managers hear that, we immediately kind of go into a different frame of mind. We're like, okay, this is going to be serious. Is it going to be physical serious? Is it going to be they're unhappy with the direction that we're going serious? Like, that is a trigger word for us to be able to put ourselves into a mental state of being open-minded, understanding, and listening. We go into a listening mode more than we have in the past, right? So I will do that often and be like, hey, this is going to be kind of awkward and difficult for me to say, but I want to say it to you, and I want to make sure that I'm getting my point across the right way. And if it comes across wrong, please ask me a question of what I really mean, and we'll keep talking about it. Just as a technique for anybody who hasn't had to do that, that's how I've approached it.
I second that.
Excellent excellent question. Practical advice. We're almost to the end of our time. I have one more question, and then we'll kind of do some final remarks things. So if anybody has a last fire, I wish I could slip it in question, raise your hand here in a moment. My last question is, separate the employee from the friend. How do you do that? Stumped the panel. We're now done.
Don't hire your friends. No, I mean,
No, it's tough, especially when you've worked with someone for a while and you develop a friendship. I mean, there's always that little bit of a wall, and you just have to make sure that you've maintained that professional distance. But there are people who I've managed who I've become very good friends with. And there are people who I've managed who I've become good friends with that I've had to lay off, and that really sucks. And I guess the point is, if you can't do that, you shouldn't become a manager.
Yeah, I think that's important. I also think it's important to realize that you're in the power position. So if it's an employee that you're friends with, you have to be very careful, because when you're outside of work and you're hanging out and your kids are playing together, you're friends, and when you're at work and you're talking, you're their boss. So just be careful about how that friendship works at work.
And there's a level of optics too to that. If you've got somebody who is your friend or a family member who I've also had report to me, you really have to make sure that you avoid the anything that looks like bias, as well as actually avoiding bias. You have to be extra scrupulous in making sure that you are not behaving in a biased manner, only going to lunch with them, for example, or frequently referencing that your kids were playing together over the weekend. Things like that you have to be hyper aware of. It's much easier if you simply do not manage friends and family.
I think it's easier if you're both working at it too, that it's not just the manager trying to pretend like this isn't my friend, that both people recognize, okay, we're at the office, we're having a meeting right now, we are not going to joke about what the kids were doing over the weekend, and we'll save that for later. And that helps with the optics, that helps with all of that.
Perceptions are quickly formed versus reality.
Yeah, and it can actually hurt the morale of the team if the rest of the team perceives that you favor one person, even if you don't favor that person. If they think you do, then that's bad.
I just tell the team, I like them better. Just kidding.
He would.
Come on.
Favoritism works, provided...
My wife used to be a manager at J&J, and one of the things she tells me is that you have to make sure that you keep a distance between a friend and a friendly. You should be friendly, but there does need to be some professional distance.
That's a good way to put, a good, easy way to think about it. Friend and friendly. Any last quick fire questions from our audience? All right, so we're down to our last few minutes. What I'd like to do is each panel member, we'll start with Carolyn and work to the right. Well, okay.
Think of something.
So the question is, leave the audience with something that they can take home, like that, friend and friendly. That's a way to think. Give a piece of advice if you're going to be a new manager, give a piece of advice as an IC, or a piece of your sage wisdom on what it means to be a manager that they can stick in their mind. Go.
I'm not there to be the boss. I'm there to make sure that you can get your job done and that you understand what the point of why you're there. So if I'm doing a good job, then you're happy, you're productive, and you feel like upper management understands you and is providing you the resources, whether it's people or equipment or money, to get your job done.
If you ever become a manager, especially unexpectedly, the first thing you should do is schedule one-on-one meetings with everybody on the team or in the group or whatever, and sit down and talk about anything. Don't talk about your job, or if they want to, talk about that. Talk about what you do on the weekends. Talk about just anything to get to know those people so they get to know you, so that when there are problems, they feel comfortable coming into your office and sitting down and starting that conversation again.
Whether you're an IC or a manager, communication is extremely important. The words you use, the tone, how you communicate, and because communication leads to misconception of how people feel and view things, regardless of where they are position-wise. I agree with everything else so far that's been said, but I would give the advice of, like, go read The Art of Nonviolent Communication if you haven't. Go read Friendly Fire as a case study that complex systems fail. These are just some basic things that I would read, but I would say work on communication and don't stop. It's not something you learn and you're like, check, right? It's always something you work on and improve on.
Yeah, I love the book recommendation thing. My wife says this is how introverts communicate. It's like TCP/IP, right? Rather than sending packets, we send book recommendations. So with that, I'm going to send a book recommendation. My book's awesome. You should definitely go buy my book. But in addition to my book, there's a book called Influence Without Authority. And I looked it up for somebody in my mini tutorial yesterday, and it was selling on Amazon for a penny plus shipping. So, I mean, you know, yeah, it's a book about how to exert influence within your organization without having the authority to compel people to behave in a certain way. And even if at some point you become a manager, you will discover that you're responsible for things that you have no possible way to directly tell people to do. And I think for people who were interested enough in this topic to show up in this room, I think it'll be a book that'll be interesting to you.
I would say just remember that although, you know, maybe there's a little bit of inherent skill in being a manager, remember that just like learning anything else, being a manager is something that you have to constantly learn and constantly learn all the new techniques and skills and tricks, and that you can learn it. You can study it in the same way that you'd study a language or particular OS or anything like that. And so what I love to do is there's a great blog called Ask a Manager, askamanager.org. And it's fabulous. She posts 2 or 3 letters a day. She responds very quickly, and she's careful about the comments section. So in fact, the comments section is useful and not a cesspool. So I would say if you're a new manager or you want to understand how managers' brains work or why they make certain choices, askamanager.org.
If you liked this session and you'd like to see it again next year, put it in the surveys, tell USENIX that we'll do it again. And my manager skill that has always served me well is you start on time and you end on time. We are done thanks to our managers.
I have one last thing I need to say.
I said I was done.
I'm one of the co-chairs for LISA next year, and so if you're interested in participating on the content recruitment team, either see me after this or email LISA17chairs@usenix.org.
Thanks so much, Carol. Thank you so much.